Okay, good morning. Good morning, everybody. And this morning we're going to carry on our discussion about the heart, blood, and how blood is circulated around the body. We've had a look at some of the functions of blood, and we've also looked carefully at the structure of the heart and seen some of the ways in which the heart moves. Now we're going to have a look at how the blood is actually conducted around the body. It's conducted around the body in an elaborate, carefully organized system of vessels which carry oxygenated blood from the heart to all of distant parts of the body, supplying every single cell in the body with nutrients and with oxygen, and picking up their waste products and returning them to those organs which need to excrete them, or to the lungs to breathe out the carbon dioxide that is produced by metabolism. So we're looking at a very elaborate system. The blood circulation is driven by the action of the heart, and the blood circulation performs many different functions in the body. It not only does it supply nutrients, oxygen, etc., but it also regulates the temperature. It conducts all of the white blood cells, which are elements of the immune system around the body, etc., etc. If I would like you please to go back, reread those slides and the chapter about blood and its function, and also revise the structure of the heart and how it functions. And then you can put the whole thing together with what we're going to talk about today. So we learned when we discussed the structure of the heart and its functions, we learned that there are in fact two major circulatory systems in the body which exist quite separate from one another. And the first is the cardiopulmonary circulation, and that is the flow of blood to and from the lungs to the heart, to carry deoxygenated blood to the lungs, oxygenated, and return it to the heart. And then there's a separate circulatory system, which is the systemic circulatory system. That is the flow of blood through the rest of the body. The cardiopulmonary circulation driven by the right-hand side of the heart. The systemic, the systemic circulation driven by the left-hand side of the heart. But we're going to learn that there are some other circulatory systems as well, which are quite specialized. What distinguishes them is they're kind of self-contained circulatory systems. The first we'll talk about is the coronary circulation. How is the heart itself, this very, very active muscle, how is the heart supplied continually with sufficient oxygen, etc., etc.? It's supplied by its own coronary circulatory system. Excuse me. The next one we're going to learn about is the portal circulation, often called the hepatic portal circulation. This is a closed circulatory system from the gut to the liver. And a portal system is a system of blood flow from one point to another, which does not have the heart involved in it. So it's like a self-contained circulatory system. The last one is very, very specialized. And we'll only discuss it really briefly because it's actually quite complicated. And that is the blood flow in a fetus. Because a fetus has an entirely enclosed circulatory system. Their blood flow is to the fetus alone. There is no interchange of blood between a fetus and the mother. The two circulatory systems are kept completely separate. Surprising though it may seem, it would be tempting to think that the mother's blood is flowing through the fetus. It is not. The fetus has an entirely self-contained circulatory system. And we'll see that in a minute. Okay, so first of all, let's just consider the nature of the vessels themselves. Well, there are two, we recognize immediately, there are two types of major vessels in the human body, and these are the arteries and the veins. Now, the arteries originate in the heart, and their destiny is to the periphery of the body. So the arteries, they have a direction. The blood flow is from the heart down the artery and away. Veins, on the other hand, gather blood and return it to the heart. So in most instances, the blood being carried by arteries is oxygenated blood. Oxygenated blood going from the heart out to the rest of the body. But there's an exception. And that exception is in the cardiopulmonary circulation, because there, the arteries going from the heart out actually carry deoxygenated blood. The definition of the artery then is that it is the vessel which leaves the heart. The definition of veins is that they return blood to the heart. The structure of those vessels is quite different. The arteries are thick-walled with a very heavy muscular layer, and that muscular layer can contract in response to the heartbeat to maintain blood pressure through the artery. Think of it this way: if the artery was thin-walled, as the heart beat, the artery would simply expand like that, and it would dissipate the pressure of the heart. Instead, this thick muscle layer maintains the diameter of the artery, and thereby it maintains the pressure of the heartbeat. This means that the arteries can conduct blood under pressure of the heartbeat for a very long distance. The veins, on the other hand, their blood is under much, much, much lower pressure. And in fact, the blood pressure inside the veins does not respond to the heartbeat. You can't feel the heartbeat in the veins the way that you can in the arteries. And the reason for that is that the arteries and the veins communicate with one another through these elaborate, very, very fine capillary beds. Have a look here and you'll see that the artery, as the arteries move away from the heart towards the body tissues, they begin to subdivide. They divide into thinner, smaller, and smaller and smaller vessels. The finest of the artery vessels is called an arteriole. And the arteriole communicates with very fine veins called venules by means of these capillary beds. And we'll see in a minute that the capillaries actually have a special structure. Their structure is different to that of the veins. The pressure of the heartbeat is dissipated here in the capillary beds. So there's a much lower pressure, blood pressure inside the veins. And the veins are thin-walled. They only have a thin layer of muscle tissue here, as opposed to this thick layer of muscle tissue in the arteries. In addition, the veins contain valves, and I'll explain their function in a minute, but this is characteristic of the veins, that they have these valves inside them. In each vessel, there actually are three layers. There's an outer layer, and then this middle muscular layer, and then an inner layer, which is very important. It's called the endothelial layer. And it is a highly specialized epithelial tissue, which is extremely smooth and which allows blood to flow without impediment through the vessels. It is smooth so that it doesn't cause any turbulence as the blood flows, because if you get turbulence, you are likely to start to have platelets settling. As soon as platelets settle, you'll remember, they attach and they begin the process of blood clotting. So it's very important that blood moves smoothly through all of the blood vessels without slowing and without settling down. So let's just have a look at let's just have a look here, because there are some names that you're going to have to remember. These three layers, the outer layer here is called the tunica externa. Sometimes you'll see it also called the tunica adventitia. It's the outer layer, and it is composed of connective tissue, of very tough connective tissue. And especially in the case of the arteries, it is structured so that it maintains the volume of the blood vessel in conjunction with the action of the muscles inside here. It's responsible for maintaining the pressure of the blood as it passes through the blood vessels. The middle layer here is called the tunica media, and it's smooth muscle. Now, you'll remember that smooth muscle does not respond to conscious thought. Okay? It is involuntary muscle, but this is very, very sensitive to instructions from the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems, and as a result, the unconscious part of the nervous system exerts a very strong influence over the muscles of the vessels. And this is extremely important in maintaining blood pressure. So this is the major monitoring of the blood pressure in the blood vessels is done by the midbrain, and instructions are sent to the vessels to either expand or to contract to maintain an optimum blood pressure for a particular circumstance. Okay, so if you were relaxed and lying on your bed, you're reading a book, whatever, you're relaxed, the vessels tend to be larger, the blood pressure is lower. Suddenly you get a fright. What will happen is that the arteries will actually expand a little to rush blood to the place, to like your muscles, that sort of thing. And the veins will actually contract to increase the blood pressures of the body. So the three layers: tunica externa, tunica media, which is important in regulating blood pressure, and then the tunica interna. And the tunica interna is endothelial cells. All of our vessels are lined with these endothelial cells that ensure smooth passage of the blood. I leave the structure of the veins for the moment. We'll discuss it in a minute. But I just want to show you what distinguishes the capillaries from these other vessels. In the capillaries, you do not have the three layers. Instead, capillaries consist only of endothelial cells, which are tightly linked together, tightly linked with one another. And so when we look here and see how this capillary bed develops here, realize that even the smallest arteriole and the smallest venule have three layers, but they subdivide into these capillaries, which have no layers except the endothelial cells. Now, those endothelial cells are tightly joined to one another, but they are semi-permeable. They allow the passage of selected molecules out and in. So, for example, the capillaries allow the flow of nutrients out into the cells that they're passing through. They allow the passage of oxygen out. But they do not allow blood corpuscles, the red blood corpuscles at least, to pass across. And they restrict the passage of all of the white blood cells. There are circumstances, however, where white blood corpuscles can in fact move across, especially the macrophages and the neutrophils. So they can get across under special circumstances. Like if there's an infection in the tissues, for example, then these capillaries become permeable to neutrophils. Neutrophils can actually make their way through them. In addition, of course, waste material, carbon dioxide, makes its way into the capillaries. and is conducted away to the lungs. I don't know if you sever even a tiny little arteriole, you might have done this at some time or another. If you cut your finger sometimes, you may cut a very fine arteriole. It is quite spectacular because you can actually, it will actually produce, you'll see a squirt of blood in response to the heartbeat, in response to the pulse. Even through the very finest arterioles, there is a lot of pressure, despite the fact that they are so thin, so remote from the heart. The pressure of the blood pressure of the heartbeat is maintained right down to these fine arterioles, but it becomes dissipated in these capillary beds. The blood pressure becomes dissipated, and one of the ways in which that is accomplished is that the volume of the blood is reduced. What happens is that some of the serum portion of the blood actually leaks out of the capillaries, and it leaks out into these tissues surrounding that the capillaries are passing through. And once it does that, we refer to that liquid as being lymph, L-Y-M-P-H, lymph. And it actually moves into its own circulatory system, which we'll talk about when we talk about the immune system. But remember, the capillary beds are leaky to serum, and that is how the pressure is reduced before it enters the venous circulatory system. Just let me check. Right, I think I've got everything. Okay, here's one other thing about the function of the capillaries. We have capillary beds all over our body, all through all of our tissue. All of our tissues are interlaced with these capillaries. But many of the capillaries are actually kept closed. Not all of them are open the whole time. And that is achieved by having little muscular sphincters at the start of the capillaries. So just have a look here. Here is an arteriole here. Here is a venule here. So these are the very fine vessels. And they are joined actually by capillary beds, but often through the capillary beds there is what they label here a thoroughfare channel. So under normal circumstances, the capillary bed is kept closed. It is kept closed by these little sphincters on the capillaries. They're little muscular sphincters that respond to instructions from the autonomous nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic. So under normal circumstances, these are closed and there's no blood flow through the capillary, right? But then in response to some instruction, and the instruction may vary depending on the function of the tissues that this is situated in, these little muscular bands open up and the capillaries flood with blood, the capillaries. And there's one instance which I think everybody knows very well, and that is if you are embarrassed or something, in the capillary beds in your face are normally kept closed in the surfaces of your skin, okay? But in response to something embarrassing or whatever, these all open and the capillaries all flush with blood, and what happens? You blush. It is visible as the blood begins flowing through these capillary beds. Well, that is a function of those capillary beds, and that is signaling. It is in primates. These capillary beds are often used to the flushing of these capillary beds. The blushing like this is used as a signal, a societal signal. But there is another very important function, especially for those in the face and the capillary beds in the hands, and also to a certain extent in the feet, not as much as the hands. but a certain extent of the heat. And that is in temperature control. If you need to radiate heat, if you need to lose heat, very often these capillary beds in your face and in your hands, they will open, and they're acting as a radiator. Blood flowing through them loses heat to the environment and cools down the body. So that is there's one very important function. In some tissues, for instance, in the muscles, these capillary beds are permanently open. But in other tissues which are only intermittently used or only intermittently stressed, the capillary beds remain closed until blood flow is actually required there. Okay, so let's have a look just at the structure of the veins, because the veins actually work in a completely different manner to the arteries. Arteries, don't forget, the blood is flowing under the direct pressure from the heartbeat. But in veins, there is no pressure from the heartbeat to drive the blood. Blood moving through the veins is not being driven by the heart or by the pressure from the heartbeat. The veins are gathering blood from the capillary beds, and they are returning it to the heart, excepting in one instance, of course, and that is in the cardiopulmonary circulation, which we saw. The veins are actually conduct oxygenated blood. But in the systemic circulation, the veins carry deoxygenated blood from those capillary beds to the heart, and that is then sent off to the lungs to be oxygenated, etc. So they also have, the veins also have the three layers: the tunica externa or adventitia, the tunica media, which is a muscular layer, and then the tunica interna. And again, the muscle layers here can be contracted or relaxed in response to instruction from the autonomous nervous system, and contracted to raise the blood pressure overall in the body, relaxed to lower the blood pressure, for example. They do have tunica externa, but it's much, much thinner than it is in the arteries. The tunica media, this muscle layer in the middle, is also very, very much thinner. They also have an endothelial layer here. Now we have to ask the question, well, if there's no pressure from the heart driving the blood through the veins, how on earth does the blood circulate? Because surely it would just pool up in the veins and stay still. Well, the answer is that in the veins, throughout the veins, there is a feature which does not occur in the arteries, and that is that there are valves. And the valves are all structured so that they stop blood from flowing away from the heart in the veins. In other words, let's just say you're standing upright, and this is a vein in your leg. And this down here would be towards your feet, right? This up here would be towards your heart. And any impulse of the blood to flow backwards like this causes this valve to close. Now this turns the veins themselves into a pumping system, because all that we have to do is compress the vein, and we will move blood in one direction. Just imagine you've just got a soft tube, right, full of fluid. You squeeze it. The fluid will move in both directions away from where you squeeze it. But if you put valves in that tube and you squeeze it, the fluid can only move in one direction. And that in this case is towards the heart. Okay, so have a look. Just imagine you've got a long vein, maybe running through your leg, and you contract the muscles on either side of the vein. You squeeze the vein. Well, below the vein, the valves will close. Above the muscle here, the valves will open. And in this way, the muscle action around the veins actually pumps the blood towards the heart. And this is exactly how our veins work. Our veins work by muscular action of the body, and just through normal movement, even small postural changes. If you're sitting, small postural changes will be squeezing veins and venules, and all of that squeezing pumps blood up towards the heart. In the abdomen and the thorax, for example, even the actions of breathing and the normal peristalsis that's going on in your gut, which you don't even have to think about, all of this muscular activity contributes to this pumping action. All of that muscular activity is exerting pressure, intermittent pressure and relaxation on veins and pushing blood up through the veins towards the heart. This is one reason, for example, why sitting in one position for a very long time is not a good idea. You should never do that. You should always be getting up intermittently, moving around, and getting your blood. You be told, get up, get your blood moving. You literally are doing that by getting up and moving. You are literally moving your blood around, moving it through the venous system up towards the heart, so it can then go off to be oxygenated in the lungs. So let's have, just let me flip back. I just want to make sure that I've covered everything. All right, this slide here, we'll talk about this in a second, the different veins that you need to know the names of. Okay, so let's have a look at these kind of the circulatory systems that we're dealing with. First, the great circulatory systems. That's the first one we have discussed before, and that is the cardiopulmonary circulation. So this is revision, right? This is the right-hand side of the heart. This is the left-hand side of the heart here. And the great veins of the body, which return blood to the heart, are the vena cava. This is one vena cava here. It's the inferior vena cava. It is returning blood from the body, from the lower body to the heart, and it returns it to this, which is the right, or the right atrium here of the superior vena cava returns all the blood, returns blood from the arms, chest, and the head, and it returns it to the right atrium here. So that's the superior vena cava, and that's the inferior vena cava. The right atrium, it goes into the right ventricle, and it is pumped off. Here's the first artery of the cardiopulmonary system. It is pumped from the right ventricle off to the lungs. And this is the only artery. It's an artery because it is leaving the heart. It's the only artery in the body which carries deoxygenated blood, carries it to the lungs. Through all of the capillary beds of the lungs, these are specialized capillary beds because they surround the little air sacs that comprise the lungs and allow carbon dioxide to pass across the capillary wall to be breathed out, and oxygen to pass in to be taken up by the hemoglobin of the red blood corpuscles. This re-oxygenated blood is returned to the heart, and it is returned by the pulmonary veins. Again, the only instance in the body where a vein carries oxygenated blood. Here they are, here, and they enter into the heart on the left atrium, which is here. From the left atrium, blood flows to the left ventricle, and then out through this huge blood vessel here called the aorta. And this is called the aortic arch. That's literally what it is. The aortic arch curls up and down behind the heart. We'll see that in a minute when we talk about the systemic system. So this is the cardiopulmonary circulation here. It's the circulation through the pulmonary veins, and then, through the pulmonary arteries, and then back through the pulmonary veins. There. That is the cardiopulmonary circulation, which reoxygenates our blood and voids the waste carbon dioxide. Okay, so having oxygenated the blood, that blood needs now to be sent out to the rest of the body, and it's sent out through this huge circulatory system called the systemic circulation. We already saw the major vessel that leaves the heart with that oxygenated blood is a huge artery called the aorta. And the aorta branches to send blood vessels off to all of the rest of the body. Remembering that the blood flowing through the aorta is performing all sorts of functions. It's going to circulate nutrients, oxygen, water, etc., etc. It's also going to be carrying hormones or hormonal messages, everything to coordinate the body. It's going to pick up waste products and move them to organs of excretion. It's going to be equalizing, regulating the body temperature, especially through all the surface vessels. And it's going to be actually moving the elements of the immune system around the body to protect the body from infections and that sort of thing. So here, this is what we mean by the systemic circulation. The systemic circulation is driven by the left-hand side of the heart. Here is the aorta here, there. And this is all through the rest of the body, all the capillary beds embedded in the body tissues, etc., etc. And all of this, as the blood loses its oxygen and picks up carbon dioxide, it is returned to the heart for recirculation here through this circulatory system, which we've discussed already, which is the pulmonary circulation. So when you look at this system, you realize that in fact these are two independent circulatory systems, and they are unified in the heart itself. This circulatory system could be running by itself, just around and around and around and around, right? This one could also just be running around and around, but that would be useless because we actually have to unite these two, and they are united by passing the blood through the heart and separating. Well, at the same time as we separate, we also unite these two circulatory systems. Now, this is systemic, and this is the cardiopulmonary or pulmonary circulation. So let's just have a look at the major. You absolutely do not have to remember all the names of everything. You're not medical students. But I do want you to remember some of the major vessels. And this is just, this in itself is a simplified version of the arterial circulation around the body. And here's an even simpler one. And I just want to describe some of the major vessels to you. And then I've got a list there for you of those that you must please remember. First of all, here's the heart would be here. And this is the aorta here. This portion here is called the ascending aorta, just because it's going upwards. This is the aortic arch there. And the aortic arch has three very big branches off it that are easily visible. It has some smaller branches that we'll talk about in a minute. But it has these very big branches that come off it. And the first is this here. It's called the brachiocephalic artery there. Brachiocephalic because we're going to see that it supplies an arm, brachial part, and it supplies the head as well, the cephalic part. So that's brachiocephalic. It branches here into the subclavian there, which goes off to the arms and the thorax. And then this here, this is very important. This is the right common carotid. The right, you can just remember it as the carotid, the right carotid artery. And the carotid artery is one of the major vessels supplying blood to the brain. So it is critically important. So there's the first branch off the aorta, brachiocephalic, branching into the subclavian, and the carotid there, the right carotid. The next branch off the aorta here is the left common carotid. That is going up here to the left-hand side of the brain. Then the next branch here is the left subclavian artery. So those three major branches, there, there, there. And then the aorta curls back down, and this is called the descending aorta, there. And the descending aorta runs against, more or less against your backbone. And it is going to now supply blood to all of the rest of the body from the thorax down. So this is the descending aorta there, also referred to here as the abdominal aorta. And it gives off branches. It gives off some really big branches, especially to your liver, to your gut. Now, all I want you to remember, the descending aorta, and then remember these. We'll see them again in a minute. There are arteries off to your kidneys called the renal arteries. There's one to your liver called the hepatic artery. And then this one here, which is called the mesenteric artery. And the mesenteric artery supplies all of your intestines. At the bottom, in the pelvis, the descending aorta divides into two very big branches. And I'm just going to ask you to remember the femoral arteries, that's all. Okay, just we're going to see that the descending aorta branches into two, the femoral arteries supplying each of the legs. Okay, so here's the list for you to remember: aortic arch, the brachiocephalic, subclavian, common carotids, the descending aorta, renal arteries, then the mesenteric arteries, and the femoral arteries. Be prepared to see a diagram with an arrow saying, what is this? Which artery is this? Okay. So I just want to mention one thing back here. These arteries here, are the femoral arteries, are tremendously important. I'll just mention one thing. I'll talk about it again in a second, but while we're talking about the arteries, I'll mention this. Leg injuries are very, very frequent, very, very common, especially in car accidents and things like that. And severance of the femoral artery is an extremely dangerous situation which requires immediate first aid. If you see anybody with a injury to the femoral arteries, is spectacular because the way in which the blood is simply pumped out in a huge volume, and people can bleed out from such an injury very quickly. And I just want to mention to you, in case you're ever in that situation, putting pressure here in the groin, putting heavy, heavy pressure on the femoral artery here can stop bleeding further down the leg. And you can save somebody's life literally in a minute by doing that. Unfortunately, you really have to hurt them to do it. It's extremely painful to exert enough pressure on this point here, but it can in fact save somebody's life if they have severance of a major artery in the leg. Okay, so what if you do sever even as I've said, you sever even a tiny little arteriole in your finger, you will see that the blood will actually spurt under pressure from the heart. Sever a vein, and that is not the case. If you sever, you can certainly bleed very, very severely from cutting a vein, but the blood essentially pours out under very low pressure and not under pressure from the heartbeat. So the veins, as we said, are conducting blood from the capillary beds and the rest of the body up towards the heart, for the most part. That is the case for the systemic. They are conducting blood towards the heart. So the major vessels that I want you to remember actually are relatively few. I want you to remember that the blood is gathered from all of the organs. For example, here are the renal veins here. And all of these here are all of the gathering veins are going to pour their blood into two major vessels. And these are the vena cava. So this is the inferior vena cava there. And this is the superior vena cava here. So those are two that you really need to remember. For the rest of it, in fact, for the most part, the names match the arteries. So you'll have, as we had renal arteries, we have renal veins. There are veins coming from all of the major organs, etc., all empty here into this inferior vena cava and into the superior vena cava. So, yes, I'm sorry. I just want to also mention that blood from the head flows through these veins here called the jugulars. Now I mention that because we hear it so often. We hear about the jugular vein. Well, here they are. They are the veins in the neck, deep in the neck, not the superior ones that you can see, but deep in the neck. And they flow down and they enter in these veins here, which are the subclavians. And you remember we saw subclavian arteries. So, and again, after the branches, they're called the brachiocephalics. All of them joining into this vena cava, the superior vena cava. So here are the names of those that I want you to remember. If I haven't specifically talked about them, look them up on that diagram. It'll be a good way for learning the names of these. Okay, so those are our great circulatory systems, right? The arterial and then the venous systems, moving all the blood around to the heart and then off to the cardiopulmonary circulation, as we discussed before. But there are a couple of special circulation systems. And the first one that we need to talk about is the coronary circulation. How is the heart itself supplied with blood, and how is the blood moved away from the heart to be reoxygenated? And here is the heart circulatory system right here. And you'll immediately recognize. Here's the aorta, the aortic arch. Here are the vena cava, etc., etc. Have a look at the artery, at the aortic arch here, and you'll see at the bottom here, right against the heart, there is a small branch of the aorta, which is the coronary artery, and it divides in two. It divides into the right coronary artery there and into the left, but the left is hidden here. Okay, it's hidden behind the pulmonary artery. That's the pulmonary artery. It's hidden behind there. So there's a branch coming here like this. And those are the coronary arteries. And they move out all around the heart. And again, they subdivide until they end up in fine capillary beds, which perfuse the whole of the heart muscle. Now, this is really important because heart muscle never rests, right? Except for a little little tiny rests in between the beats. It never stops. The muscle action of the heart goes on and on and on and on and on. And as a result, it's, first of all, it has a high metabolic demand. It needs a rich supply of oxygen and also needs a rich supply of nutrients to keep going. Correspondingly, if it's working so hard, it's producing lots of waste product. Lots of carbon dioxide, lots of other waste, metabolic waste products, which need to be conducted away. And again, the coronary veins gather up all the blood and move it back to the heart so that it can end up being reoxygenated, etc. So these here are the coronary veins. They have capillary beds throughout the muscle tissue, and those communicate with veins, with venules, and then with the veins, and the veins all empty into this huge vessel here. It's so large, it's called here the great cardiac vein, but it is more commonly referred to as the coronary sinus there, and it's there. And the coronary sinus empties into the right atrium. So just as all of the other deoxygenated blood does, it is emptied into the right atrium, and the blood is then moved off to be reoxygenated. So we have the coronary arteries throughout here, beds of capillaries in all of the muscle. Blood is gathered up and it is redelivered to the heart through this coronary sinus. So this coronary circulation is tremendously important. As I said, heart has a high metabolic demand. So unfortunately, any impairment of this circulation can be extremely serious. Imagine, for example, that we have a blockage in this vessel here. Let's just put a blockage there. That blockage could arise, for example, from narrowing of those vessels by having fat deposited on the walls of the vessel. It could be narrowed, blood flow could be stopped by a blood clot that formed in here. And if that happens, then all of this muscle tissue down below here, all of this becomes starved of oxygen. If it's irrevocably starved of oxygen, if no oxygen at all is supplied to that tissue very rapidly, that tissue will die. And that is the classic definition of a myocardial infarction, is when there is a blockage which deprives an area of the heart muscle of oxygen and the muscle tissue dies. That muscle tissue, if the person survives, that muscle tissue may be replaced with scar tissue, and the whole functioning of the heart becomes impaired because the ventricles can't contract properly, for example, because they have become scarred with scar tissue. So this coronary circulation is tremendously important. Okay, so here's another specialized circulation, and this is called the portal circulation or the hepatic portal circulation. I prefer to say hepatic portal because there are one or two other small portal circulatory systems that we are not going to talk about. But the hepatic portal circulation allows veins to move directly from different parts of the gut directly to the liver without going through the heart first. So these, for example, this here is the gut, and this is the mesenteric vein. And the mesenteric vein empties into this vein here called the hepatic portal vein. And it then goes into the liver, circulates around. That there are other branches from the gut that also do the same thing. Here, for example, is another mesenteric vein. This is from other parts, the small intestine as well as the large intestine. There are veins from the stomach, and there are veins from the spleen and from the pancreas. So all of these are communicating directly with the liver. That's the hepatic part. Hepatic refers to the liver. So this is, and the hepatic portal system, one of the things it does, for example, is it carries nutrient absorbed into the bloodstream, and it transports it directly to the liver for processing. Instead of going through the heart and everything else and being reoxygenated and everything else, it communicates directly with the liver. And the liver is one of the major processing systems of our digestive system. So it's receiving all this material directly without it going through the rest of it. The liver itself communicates with the inferior vena cava. So the blood eventually does get moved off to the lungs for reoxygenation, etc. But in the meantime, it has already been processed. All the nutrients, everything have been processed by the liver. And for example, all the glucose will have been extracted from the blood, as much glucose as is necessary, rather, is extracted from the blood and is converted into storage products, for example, by the liver. In addition, the liver also detoxifies the blood. So it will detoxify toxins which have been picked up in the gut. For example, the one which is easiest to think of is alcohol. Alcohol is absorbed very, very rapidly by the stomach itself and by the small intestine. And the blood containing alcohol is routed to the liver through the hepatic portal system. And the liver attempts then to detoxify. How rapidly it can do that depends on the stress on how much alcohol there is, and on the stress it places on the liver. Okay, and the last special circulatory system that I'll mention is the fetal circulation. So a fetus in the uterus obtains all its oxygen, all its nutrients, etc., from the mother's blood, but not through its lungs or its own digestive system. That all of the oxygen and the nutrients pass from the mother's blood to the fetus's blood system across the placenta. But the two blood systems, the fetal and the maternal, do not mix. Instead, these substances pass across capillary beds which lie very, very close to one another, but which do not mix with one another. So the thing to know is that the fetal circulation system is actually an open system. We saw in the adults, we just saw before, that there are two closed systems, the cardiopulmonary and the systemic. And the place where they communicate is in the heart, and it's very carefully regulated. So in the heart, we do not ever have mixing of oxygen poor and oxygen rich blood in the mature organism. However, in the fetus, the circulatory system is open, and oxygenated and deoxygenated blood can mix with one another and circulate through the fetus. The reason that this can happen is because the fetus is absolutely dependent on the mother for the supply of oxygen, etc. So the mother supplies a rich oxygen supply to the fetus. It doesn't matter if the blood mixes. It doesn't matter at all. In addition, the fetus is not that active that it's producing a huge amount of carbon dioxide or waste products, etc. So this fetal system is open. It mixes oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Now, the circulatory system in the fetus is quite complicated. So, and I don't necessarily need you to know all of the fine details, but I'll just point out one or two things to you. The first is some of the vessels are joined to one another. Sometimes veins and artery are joined in the fetus. So, for example, here's the pulmonary artery there going off. Here is the aorta there. Pulmonary artery carrying deoxygenated, relatively deoxygenated blood in the fetus. Not that deoxygenated, but there it is there. In the adult, it would carry deoxygenated blood to the lungs to be oxygenated. The aorta would carry oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. In the fetus, these are joined there. The blood mixes here. In addition, there are holes in the septa of the ventricles to allow mixing of the blood in the heart. So what the fetus ends up pumping around its body is not all oxygen, it's mixed deoxygenated and oxygenated blood, but it's fine because it is so heavily oxygenated by the mother that plenty of oxygen is supplied to the fetus. Now, in addition, the fetus has connections to the placenta, very, very rich connections to the placenta. And these are umbilical arteries and umbilical veins here, which go to the placenta. When the infant is born, all of these close up. This ductus arteriosus, the join between the artery and the veins here, that closes up. The holes in the septa close up. All of this is lost. All of this, the umbilical arteries and the umbilical vein here, these wither away and they end up as a little bit of scar tissue attached to your belly button. All of this converts at birth. The whole system converts to a closed circulatory system. All of these connections are closed off, and we have the mature circulatory systems, the cardiopulmonary circulatory and the systemic circulatory systems complete. Okay, so I'm going to end off there for today, and we'll finish this off at our next class on Wednesday.